Good morning again, everyone. My name is Mallory Shelton. I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Relations here with the Naval Aviation Museum Foundation. And on behalf of the Foundation and the National Naval Aviation Museum, thank you and welcome to Discovery Saturday in the museum. It's very nice to see a lot of new faces here. Discovery Saturday is a program that we do typically every month, and it really is about honoring and educating the general public about naval aviation history. And so it was the perfect fit to have you all be here today, Ghost Riders of the Attack Squadron 164, and to hear the story of Lady Jessie. And that's exactly what our Discovery Saturday program is all about. It's about telling these cool stories behind our aircraft and exhibits here in this beautiful facility and really sharing it with people, general public and all of you. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our museum historian. He is going to tell you a little bit more about what you're going to hear today, as well as lead and moderate the panel. So without further ado, Hill Goodspeed.
Thank you very much, Mallory. It is an honor for us at the museum to have the opportunity to host the members of the Ghost Riders of Attack Squadron 164, their families, and special guests for this reunion this weekend. There are links to the service of VA 164 all around, though some are not visible or apparent. Many of the buildings in which they trained and the runways from which they flew are still around here in Pensacola. And offshore, beneath the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, lies what remains of the aircraft carrier Oriskany, the carrier from which many of them flew and on which they survived a tragic fire. Hanging above us in the left wing position, in the markings of Blue Angel number 3, is an A4 Skyhawk that before flying for crowds at air shows was painted light gold gray over white and wore the markings of Attack Squadron 164. But it is another Skyhawk that brings us here today, one that hangs near the entrance to the museum. On one side of it are two names, Lieutenant Commander R.C. Perry and Lady Jessie. It is the memories these two people, one a brother in arms and the other a veritable mother to all the Ghost Riders, that endures. Now, with a special thank you to the husband and wife team of Jim and Suzanne Eckes, who donated their time and talents to make this film, we present their story.
Pilots, have this history from World War I on of, the Knights of the Air, and they paint their airplanes, and they'd have fancy helmets. But by the time the Vietnam War started, the Navy had said, no personalizing the airplanes. The only exception was an aircraft named Lady Jessie.
The way that it came about that there was an aircraft that had nose art on it was because of two very special people, and that was Lieutenant Commander Dick Perry and Lady Jessie, who was Jessie Beck.
Cruising along the desert interstate, I almost passed it by. The town was some distance away towards the middle of the valley. Wind, as always in the desert, was constant. There was a park with a sandlot baseball diamond and a small memorial monument with a bronze plaque. I had come to view it. Dick Perry was one of those few very special people who stay in the most vivid part of your memory for a lifetime. He was full of an uncommonly huge bunch of love for just about everything. Family, friends, flying, you name it. What Dick touched he loved with a passion found in but a very few.
He was a superb pilot. He was a really excellent naval officer, and he was just a good guy. he was a good man.
Not just a good leader and a courageous combat pilot, but a man of integrity, old school Navy.
He was one of those people who was enthused, happy.
Dick became the spirit of the Ghost Riders in those years. Oh yes, he was the finest of naval officers. He was unquestionably destined to be an admiral, maybe even chief of naval operations, possibly more. He knew what to do when things were not going well.
He had been on a twilight mission, been hit by anti-aircraft fire. It blew the nose off the airplane where all the electronic equipment was stored, and it was getting dark. He had to dead reckon back out to the carrier. The only thing he had was a flashlight and just a Boy Scout compass. And he managed to get this very sick airplane on a carrier at night. I mean, just a spectacular piece of airmanship.
We lost half of our pilots that cruise, many in a fire aboard our carrier, Oriskany.
So a group of us were in the ready room. Smoke was starting to come in under the door, and Dick said, "I think we better think about getting out of here. It's going to be thick out there. Everybody get in a line and grab the belt of the guy ahead of you. I'll lead you out. I know a way." And so away we went.
You have to understand that when the lights go out on the aircraft carrier, I mean, there is just no light. There's no ambient light anywhere. And it's filled with smoke. But he got them out.
He was a natural leader. He understood how to make people do what they should be doing and need to do. Jessie Beck had come to Reno in 1938 as a young divorcee, brought her little boy along, because she had been promised a job by Pappy Smith. His son had a little tiny gambling outfit called Harold's. Jessie had risen in the casino, and in 1950 she fell in love with and married Fred Beck, who owned the Keno Pan horse race betting concessions. As the casino grew, so did their business. Then he died in 1954, about the time Dick Perry was in college.
He got a job at Harold's Club while he was in college. He and Jessie met and they hit it off. It was a kind of a work mother, work son kind of relationship. When he got out of school and he went into the Navy, their friendship endured.
So she put together care packages to send to Dick and his friends. But Jessie Beck did everything in a large way.
It was, "Hey, there's a package from Jessie in the ready room."
There was all these boxes, and take anything you want.
Cards, cookies,
Poker chips, popcorn.
anything that could be shipped.
It seems like such a little thing, you know, to say that there's care packages coming in and they got decks of cards and cookies, but at that time, although the war wasn't that unpopular yet, still it wasn't like in World War II where the whole country was mobilized. So we were pretty much out there on our own. And to get anything that recognized you as doing something, you know, for the country, or that people were thinking about you was big.
Dick wrote back and said, "You're sending too much." I gave some of it to the other squadron, VA 163, the other A4 squadron. And she took them under her wing and started sending even more stuff.
May I help you?
So she got, I think it was the telephone operators across the state of Nevada to get donated paperback books.
Thank you, just a moment.
And they put them in these huge cartons. I mean, we had books coming out of our ears, so we scattered them all over the ship. And when the next box arrived, we started scattering them to other ships. And Paul Engel was the commanding officer of 164, and because of the things that Jessie Beck had done, Dick asked, and Paul Engel thought it was appropriate to paint Lady Jessie, name Dick's aircraft in honor of Jessie Beck.
Her philanthropy just grew and grew. She expanded from our two squadrons to Army units, Air Force units.
Jessie Beck, I met her in '67 when I just joined the squadron, and she was hosting a party in Reno, all expenses paid for the pilots and their wives.
We had this fire, and that was a terrible event aboard Oriskany. When we got back, she invited all the officers in VA 164, our squadron, VA 163, the Saints, to Reno. She put us, our wives, girlfriends up She took us to dinners, and we went to shows.
She was so gracious and so supportive. You just had to love her. There was nothing else to be done but love Jessie.
July 10th, 1967. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Mullane, tomorrow we leave QB Point in the Philippines and head for Yankee Station in combat. Friday we will fly our first combat hop, and I want you to know that it is with pleasure that I go into battle flying with your son Mike as my wingman.
I thought, I have lucked out. My Irish luck is holding, you know. I am flying on Dick Perry's wing.
This is my second combat cruise, and I assure you that the uppermost thought in my mind is to bring Mike home safely to his family.
I grew up around naval aviators my entire life, and so he fit the mold of what you wanted to be when you became a real grown-up.
Men like Dick Perry, Doug Mao, Denny Weekman, and then Bill Spann on the second cruise. They had, you know, such courage and integrity and valor. Thank God they were there to lead us into this, because it was pretty bad, starting in July of '67.
I was shot down the fifth day of the cruise, and I was the seventh pilot to be lost or shot down.
At that time, the Rolling Thunder operation, which was the air war over North Vietnam, just started cranking up to full steam, and we were flying 3 Alpha strikes a day.
Dick was our division lead, a strike into Haiphong. To this day, that millisecond, the unseen missile appearing under his plane and exploding, is frozen in my consciousness.
Somebody said magic stones break, which meant move, get a maximum evasion. Right at that point, I saw Dick's airplane in almost a 90-degree bank, pulling very hard away from me. I remember looking over my canopy rail, and I could see Dick's airplane, you know, just separating from me. And then there was one big whoomph.
The explosion buffeted us. When we recovered, Dick was already turning for the Tonkin. He was talking calmly.
John said, I'm with him, we're going out. You go on. So I went into the target.
As we reached the coastline, he became silent. His plane caught fire and rolled out of control. But just as it rolled through wings level, Dick ejected. Fine, he's in a good chute. The helo is on the way, I reported over the air.
His feet wet, he's over the water. We have a good chute. If you were over the water and you had a good chute, we were going to get you. You know, your chances were 90% that you were going to be recovered. So I thought, okay, and I go back to the strike frequency.
Soon my wingman George alerted me, though. He should be talking to us from the chute by now, John. I took a slow flyby. Dick was lifeless in his parachute. The rescue swimmer went down and confirmed him as a KIA. Then shore batteries opened fire. Too risky to continue, we had to leave Dick to the sea.
We hit the target, exit, go back to the carrier. Here's the skipper, Doug Mao, and he walked up to me and he says, Mike, Dick didn't make it. It was a complete surprise because I was just sure he was alive. You know,
Air Wing 16 had the highest loss rate of any Navy air wing in the war. We came right into flying the big missions right off the bat, every day.
Not only did I care for this man and have this tremendous bond with him, but if he could get shot down, anybody could get shot down, including me. Shortly after that, the I calculated when my life expectancy would expire, and I said, you're not going to survive this. Your replacement is not going to survive this.
It's strange as it sounds. Once you accepted that, it was like all the worry was gone, and yeah, we're not going to make it out, but okay, I accept it. I mean, it was to that point.
How good you were as a man or an officer or a pilot just didn't matter. It was just sheer dumb luck. Dick's airplane was Lady Jessie. The skipper always flies 401. After Dick was killed, we put Lady Jessie's name on his aircraft.
I don't know exactly who came up with the idea, but all of a sudden Lady Jessie was painted on our #1 airplane, 401. Jessie became such a mother to us all. It was just the right thing to do. And it became a tradition in the squadron until the squadron was finally decommissioned.
As the war ground on, the popular support eroded and then turned into active opposition. But Jessie Beck never changed.
As crushed as she was, they were very close. But she just carried on, and I can remember thinking, well, if she can be this strong, we can do it. She did more and more. She was doing things with the Army and the Air Force. She was a phenomenal woman.
One of the Army units recommended her for the Medal of Freedom. Now that's the highest civilian medal that can be given. After Dick was shot down, she continued to support our squadron. And each skipper, they knew that story, and they were getting that kind of support by Jessie Beck, so the name got bigger. It became a really famous airplane, the most famous A4.
The A4 Skyhawk was, pound for pound, the most effective and versatile attack aircraft that was ever produced. Skyhawks were the primary attack aircraft for much of the Vietnam War for the Navy. Without a doubt, the most famous A4 was Lady Jessie.
In my mind, it's appropriate that the fame of the aircraft reflects the celebration of Jessie Beck and the memory of Dick Perry.
We buried Dick in the spring of 1987. Surprisingly, his remains were returned. Standing beside his grave in Arlington, hearing the strains of America the Beautiful, and remembering my stopping by, it seemed to me that so many of America's very uncommon heroes and leaders have sprung unashamedly from the good and common people spread across its heartland. Dick Perry was an uncommonly great human being. The heights to which he and thousands other youth from our heartland might have risen, we shall not know. All we can know now is that not knowing is the greatest tragedy of war.
Again, on behalf of the museum, I'd like to thank Jim and Suzanne Eckes, who produced that amazing film without any charge because they felt so strongly about the story of Dick Perry and Lady Jessie and the Ghost Riders. And now I'd like to recognize some special guests who are here. First, the family of Lieutenant Commander Dick Perry. So please stand and be recognized as I call your name. It's Steve Perry, his wife Alice, Ruth Young, Dick Perry's sister, and Dick Perry's grandson Richard Perry and his wife Antonia. And we also have some family members of the famous Lady Jessie. Her daughter-in-law, Helen Brown, her granddaughter, Nancy Risley, her granddaughter, Jenny Solinsky, and her great-grandson, C.J. Risley. Please stand and be recognized. Well, as part of today's event, we're very fortunate, as the film alluded to, Lady Jessie, after Lieutenant Commander Perry's death, became really the responsibility of the commanding officers of VA-164. It was their aircraft on which Lady Jessie was painted. So we're very fortunate to have with us to share some of their memories about their service with the Ghost Riders, two former skippers of VA-164. The first is Captain Bill Spann. And Captain Spann, if you'd like to come on up to the stage here. And while he's walking up, I need to acknowledge him, because it is through his tireless efforts for many, many months that the aircraft that we have on display in the museum quarterdeck, it was painted in VA-163 markings. And Captain Spann diligently contacted us and shared the story of Lady Jessie with the museum, and it's because of his efforts, and that's why one side of that aircraft has been repainted in VA-164 markings with Lieutenant Commander Perry's name and that of Lady Jessie. So thank you, Captain Spann, for all your efforts. We're also very honored to have Admiral Stan Arthur with us. He was the last VA-164 commanding officer, so really the last one to whom Lady Jessie was assigned. Admiral Arthur. I'd like to acknowledge Admiral Arthur. He has been on our Naval Aviation Museum Foundation Board of Trustees for many years, so a lot of what you see around here is through the efforts of his work on the foundation. So thank you, Admiral. Well, the first question I'd like to ask each one of you gentlemen is just share your memories of Lady Jessie, your relationship with her, and what you remember about that very special lady.
Lady Jessie did so much for us and so much for our morale when we were on the cruise and during the onshore duty that we had. She invited all of the pilots' wives and families to Reno on several occasions at her expense, and took us to many top shows to introduce us to many of the top performers whom she knew personally. An incident that occurred was when all the squadron officers and their wives were there, the pilots. There was a rumble in the back of the auditorium, and Lady Jessie said, Bill, go back and see what's going on. So what was going on was one of the attendants wouldn't let an enlisted man down to see us because he just found out that we were there, and so he wanted to come down to say hello to us. And I said to him, what's the problem? He said, well, he doesn't have a coat and tie. So Jessie asked me about it, and I said, well, that was the story. And she went up and told the man, you give him your coat and tie, which he did. and the enlisted man came down and sat with us. I gave the eulogy at Jessie's funeral. I got a call from Helen and John Brown that Jessie had died. I got a call on Friday. I said, I'm on my way. So I talked to the commanding officer who was retired, Admiral Mao at the time, and I told him about it. He said, Bill, I can't make it because I've got an important engagement at the Pentagon. I said, but he said, I know that you can handle it. And I said, yes, I'd be honored to. So I had a feeling that Helen Brown would, and John would ask me to do the eulogy, so I kind of prepared a eulogy on the way out. And when I landed, they welcomed me and said, well, Bill, would you please do us the honor of giving the eulogy? And I said, oh, I certainly would be more than honored. I told everybody about the things that Lady Jessie had done for us and our morale, and the belt telephone operators of Reno that she got to send us things also. And I related all the things that she had done, and I said, when Lady Jessie arrives at the gates of heaven, she will be greeted by, I named 7 of the pilots that we had lost, standing there, and at the head would be Dick Perry saluting her, saying, Lady Jessie, your work is done. And that had quite an impact on me and everybody else, because we were much appreciative of all the things that she had done. I mean, this was during a time when respect for the military was not fashionable because of Vietnam. And so she was the shining light. Thank you. Do you have any questions at all? Because I was very closely associated with Jessie and her daughter.
We're going to have questions at the very end.
Okay,
So.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Admiral, what are your memories of Lady Jessie?
Well, I was a benefactor late on meeting Lady Jessie, but I had already had an opportunity to see what she had been doing for the folks in 164 and 163. Back in '68, when Bill had the squadron and they finished their last Oriskany cruise, we've ended up with 3 A4 squadrons on Hancock. I was in 55 and 163 and 164. We're now with us in Air Wing 21. And of course we were Brand X because 163 and 164 were so close. But we got acquainted with the story of Lady Jessie and Dick Perry, and what an impact it had on the members of 164 and 163. And so we watched and we saw at that time was when the 401 became Lady Jessie, the skipper's airplane. And that couple of cruises with them, and then I went ashore and then came back after a year to be XO and then CO of 164. And Lady Jessie was still involved with the squadron. Dick Perry's name was well recognized within the squadron. And she just picked up where Bill just left off. I mean, there's nothing that she could do any more than she could do for us. Anything that she could do, it was just automatic. So we're going up to Fallon, and that's traditionally when the squadron got together with Jessie, and she always had a big soiree over in Reno, and introduced to the new members of the squadron. And so we went over. I was reminded yesterday that I sent one of our sterling young officers over to Reno with a little check to sort of help fund the kitty for the event that she was going to sponsor. And he came back and reported that the mission wasn't very successful, that he still had to check in his pocket, which Lady Jessie had jammed into his pocket, and in fairly strong language said, "You give this back to the CO and tell him if he ever tries to do this again, he won't be welcome over here." So she continued to just treat us fantastic, and as Bill mentioned, the times when we finally came back from the last combat cruise, we were not very popular people, and but her support never waned, and the story with Lady Jessie and Dick Perry is with every Ghost Rider that's ever been in the squadron. She'll be there forever.
Thank you, Admiral. Well, as was mentioned in the film, Lady Jessie became the most famous Skyhawk around, and the Skyhawk suffered more losses of aircraft in the Vietnam War than any other type of aircraft, and it had more widespread service than any other type of aircraft. What was it like to fly the A4, and what made it such a good aircraft and one that you enjoyed flying?
You want to take? Well, for one thing, it was a great combat aircraft, very maneuverable. It could handle itself with the fighters. I remember one time when, as a matter of fact, it was on my first Alpha Strike bombing mission with like 14 bombers and fighter support, and they called MiG-15s in the area, and I said, damn, I better watch out. We had the fighters up that were protecting us, F-8 Crusaders, and I pulled off the target, and all of a sudden I saw two MiGs in front of me. I said, hell, the best place for me to do is get between them. So I flew up between both MiGs, figuring that they couldn't shoot me down, and I'll have to find a way to get out of this. And I looked, and they weren't MiGs, they were Navy Crusader fighter pilots. These guys looked at me questionably, and when we got back to the ship, they came in the ready room and said, what the hell were you doing? He said, you came in between us, you know, you barely had any room. I said, hey, it was a matter of survival. I thought you guys were MiGs, and the best place for me would be between you. Well, it was a great experience because we did our combat, which we were trained to do, and we lost a lot of pilots and a lot of airplanes, but we got the job done, and we closed the bridges, and we didn't hit the targets that we really wanted to hit because that was a governmental decision, and had they would have allowed us to do it, the war would have been much shorter, much shorter.
Well, the A4, it evolved as it went through the war. The airplane got bigger engines, we got more avionics, and finally for our last cruise in '72, we ended up with the only Navy squadron that had a nose now that had the ability to spot laser spots on the ground. And we were sort of tied to the Air Force for the strikes that we ran in support of some of their missions because they had designators to light up the target with their designator, and then we could see where they were pointed. Finally, China Lake developed a couple of experimental type black boxes that you could hand hold in the back of an airplane, except we didn't have a back seat, so we borrowed two combat configured A4s from the Marines and went through the air wing because we didn't have enough pilots to fly all the missions we had going at the time with our own pilots, so we got recce pilots. We had an air intelligence officer fly with us, a couple of Willie Fudd drivers, and they worked the laser designator, and so we started getting our own targets so we could go self-designating and bomb the way with great accuracy with these lasers. So the great thing about the A4 was it just continually evolved throughout the war, and it was just as effective as any airplane we had on the last day. And so all of us that were on the small deck carriers flying A4s were pretty happy with that nice small tight cockpit and just strap it on and go.
And I know y'all are very experienced in the A4 as far as combat missions. And what do you have any memories of any missions that stick out that you flew as in the A4 that were particularly memorable?
I had my most memorable mission was when I was supposed to attack. We had an air-to-ground missile called the Shrike, which would home in on the Fansong radar that they were shooting SAM missiles at us. So we went ahead of the strike group. We were quite exposed because we got shot at quite a bit. And we had a fighter escort with us to keep the MiGs off our tail. So my mission was to knock out a SAM site near Hanoi when the strike group can come in and hit the target. So my plan was to come in low level right off the ground and pre-program my Shrike that when I pulled up at the optimum angle, it would fire and guide in on the surface-to-air missile site. And as I was pulling up, my fighter escort said, 2 SAMs, 12 o'clock, break off. And I thought to myself, damn, I don't want to go through this again. I'll wait till my missiles pop off, and then I'll roll on my back and pull through. Which I did, and my fighter pilot got separated, and my escort, and I rolled on my back and pulled through, and the 2 SAMs went right over my head and self-detonated away from me. I continued on the target. I had 4 500-pound bombs. So I continued on the target, and I dropped the bombs. I could see the missiles exploding and burning, so my Shrike had hit, and the radar van was burning. So I dropped the rest of my bombs on a target, and as I was coming out, I saw an A4 from the strike group coming back at low level, 100 feet off the ground, and there was a SAM missile on his tail that was shot at him, and the missile was tracking him on the way out, and I thought, how do I tell this guy he's got a missile in his butt? And I said, if I get on guard, every A4 in the sky is going to be turning and maneuvering around. So I didn't say anything, but apparently the missile ran at its designated distance and hit the ground and self-exploded, and the pilot was saved. I got back to the carrier, and the F-8 pilot said, God, why didn't you break it off when I called the 2 missiles fired at you? And I said, well, I just didn't want to go through this again. I was just taking my chances. So fortunately, I survived. Worked that good.
Well, sometimes in all of this, there comes a little bit of humor in the business. When I was leading a pretty large strike group, and I had one of our brand new Nuggets on my wing, and we were up close to where the Thanwall Bridge is, which is legendary as far as a target goes, but we were going to go past it onto another target. And it just so happened that they were expecting us at the bridge, and so as we crossed over it, we were engaged with about everything they could throw at us. And so my wingman out here, we had 37 millimeter and some 57 and a little bit of 85, and you could see the tracers coming up through us and the red balls, and all of a sudden he started snugging into me, got in closer, and I'm pushing him out because we weren't at the roll-in point yet, and I wanted him out a little ways. He kept coming, and he finally got in a parade position like the Blue Angels are flying right up here, and so we go in the dive, release the bombs, get back to the ship. And I said, what in the world were you doing? Yeah, closing in on me as we approached the target. He said, well, Skipper, he said, I saw all that stuff going on in between us there, and it was scaring the living daylights out of me, and I just got in close so I wouldn't have to see it. I said, did you ever think that you were just going to go where it was? Oh, no, I just didn't want to see it.
Well, in this day and age, we, with advances in weaponry and a lot the ordnance can take out multiple things and can smart bombs and smart weapons. What was a typical strike like in Vietnam? You had to fly multiple aircraft on these Alpha strikes. What were they like?
Most of the Alpha strikes, that we called them, had about 16 A-4 bombers and a fighter escort and associated radar aircraft. And the strike leader was alternated between the commanding officer of the squadrons and the executive officer and maybe the ops officer. They're the ones that led the Alpha strike, and they were responsible for planning the strike. Of course, we would get the execution order from Washington, D.C. that during this time they'd send us a message and say, hit Hanoi Thermal Power Plant at such and such a time. And so we would go back and say, yeah, we can do it. So that was our mission. So on the way, there was a lot of radar jamming by the radar jamming aircraft, and the ships offshore would jam the radar. And then, of course, we had our flak suppressors that before we rolled in, they would fly down and knock out the gun sights that were shooting at us. And then we had our squadron that had the capability of carrying the Shrike that would hit their missile sites. So we would proceed on to the target. It would not be unusual to have less than 20 or 30 SAMs shot at us from all different directions. I have to tell you a story. I went to Russia in 1999 to fly their MiG-29. And the Russian pilot, I told him, I said, well, do you think I'm going to fly this airframe from the back seat? It's not going to happen. I want to fly it from the front seat, but I don't want to go for a ride. I want to fly it. So he said, okay, Bill, I'll check your qualifications, which he did. And he says, okay, I personally announce you shall fly the aircraft from the front cockpit, which I did. And it's very wonderful that I was able to fly a Russian up-to-date fighter plane. I said, this is a wonderful opportunity. So Sasha said to me, Bill, did you have any surface-to-air missiles shot at you during the Vietnam? I knew you flew in Vietnam. I said, yeah. I said, Sasha, I had 88 shot at me personally. He said, 88? How do you know? I said, every time I come back from a mission, I put down the number of missiles that were shot at me because I did a lot of Shrike hops ahead of the squadron and stuff like that. He says, oh, yeah, that's a lot. He said, and you never got hit? I said, no, I never got hit. That was close. I said, but I never got hit. He said, why? I said, they were Russian missiles. So he got a big kick out of that. He still communicates with me today, and he just recently sent me a photograph, and he and I in our flight suits. I gave him a couple American flight suits and a ball cap saying Top Gun, and he was real appreciative of it. But we corresponded quite a bit, and he now flies for Aeroflot, so the next time he comes into Washington, D.C., we're going to get together and have dinner and stuff like that. So anyhow, I thought that was a wonderful experience to be able to fly a first-line Russian fighter with a Russian pilot and have that exchange, which we still have today.
Well, the Alpha strikes are, they were always interesting. Obviously, if it was an Alpha strike, the target was a high-value target. They usually knew we were coming, and so you knew that you were going to see SAMs, you were going to see everything that they could throw at you. The interesting part is trying to get the gaggle together to begin with. When you think about 16 to 20 A4s launched, and then all the fighter escorts and everybody else assembled, the refueling that had to go on for the fighters, we A4 drivers didn't have to refuel unless we ran out on the way back. So trying to get it organized in a timely manner so you can make your time on target was absolutely essential. And so it took a lot of skill from all the pilots to make sure that they were at the top of their game before we even headed for the beach. And then the in-flight checks as you went, and then finally not to forget the master arms switch when you went over the beach, so by the time you got to target, if you hit the pickle, the bombs would come off, which was one of the things you wanted to make sure happened. The other point was over the target itself was trying to get that gaggle of guys that had to point their nose at the ground to drop the bombs to make sure that we all knew where we were coming from on the target. We didn't want to have all 20 of us in the same line coming down the chute, so we had to sort of wheel around the target and time the roll-ins so that you didn't impede somebody else's progress towards the target or getting mixed up with their bombing runs. So it was a very tight situation when you've got all this stuff happening, all the guns shooting and the missiles coming, and still maintaining the discipline to get to your right roll-in point and get into the right dive angle, airspeed, altitude to drop your bombs. So not only did you have a little bit of a scare factor with what was going on around you, you also had the professional duty to make sure that you got to the right spot at the right airspeed, right altitude, and made sure your bombs hit the target. And then the egress was always, sometimes we ended up joined up a little bit different than we were on the way in, as people found somebody they thought were their wingman. Turned out to be another squadron, but it was okay. We were all going to the same place. So it was interesting, a lot of high energy, a lot of angst, but professionally rewarding experience.
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your experiences in VA 164. And I would like to open up the floor to any, or if you have any final comments that you'd like to make before I open up the floor to questions.
I have one additional comment. There are several of our pilots here from 164. One of the things that I want to tell you is that you must appreciate their contribution. They went through hell. So, it gets emotional.
Well, thank you, Captain, and thank you. Would all the members of the Ghost Riders please stand so we can recognize your service? I'd like to open up the floor for any questions or comments.
I always consider Lady Jessie as our patron of the saint. I really did, because she did so much for us. She was a saint.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. There's to be a microphone right here for you, sir. He's bringing you a microphone. So.
13.
Thank you. My name is John Davis. You may have seen me on the screen. I have to take this opportunity with the Bren and Jessie's family here to relate one little idiosyncrasy that I came across with Jessie. And the story goes like this. I don't know whether you knew this little idiosyncrasy that she had, but sometime after I was in the squadron, my wife and I again were driving through Reno, called Jessie and said, like to stop and say hi. She said, wonderful, John. She said, come by the hotel, I'll pick you up, and we're going to go out to my house for lunch, which we did. Wonderful lunch at the house. What I remember is that as we proceeded through the streets of Reno, as we came to each and every stop sign and stoplight, Jessie would take her big Cadillac, bring it to a stop, put it in park, set the parking brake, and turn the engine off. After about the third time of that, I think she saw the puzzled look on the face, my face and my wife's face. She looked up with that sweet smile and said, "Saves a little gas."
Any other questions or? Yes, sir.
My name is Mike Garcia, and first of all, I want to thank all of you for your service. I'm a pilot too, and it's because of you that this is the greatest club in the world to be a part of. So thank you. And this is actually a question on behalf of my wife. She was wondering, it was a turbulent time in our nation's history with regard to how the folks at home received us. Do you know if Lady Jessie herself experienced any hostility from civilians?
Did you hear that? I didn't. Okay. I don't believe she did, from what the family is saying. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we'd like to finish today by asking one of the Ghost Rider pilots, Don Purdy, to come up. He has a poem that he wrote about Dick Perry and Lady Jessie, and we thought it'd be a fitting way to conclude the ceremony. We also, yes, sir. We also have, want to let you know that for interested parties, Jim and Suzanne Eckes are making available some of the DVDs of the film. So if you're interested in that, we'll have a piece of paper up here you can put your address on. And also we have as well, you'll notice in the film there was a reading of an article about visiting Dick Perry's memorial plaque, and copies of that are also available up here for anybody who would be interested. Mr. Purdy?
One moment.
Sit down, Mick. Yep.
Guy right there is a 4-star admiral, and he should have been CNO of the Naval Operations.
My name is Dan Proctor. I'm a 72 Ghost Rider, but I thought that I was... Anyway, my name is Dan Proctor. I was a 72, 75 Ghost Rider, but I really would like to recognize another skipper, Fred Ghostbrink.
And I think in tribute to the final days of VA 164, the last executive officer we had, Ed Davis, is here with us. He was the one that turned off the lights and locked the door when we decommissioned the squadron.
This is the shortened version, so we'll be wrapping this up shortly here. But one thing that wasn't mentioned in the film, that Dick Perry was Batman and Mike Mullane, his wingman, was Robin. So that, and I don't know if we also mentioned in there that Lady Jessie was sometimes known as the gambling grandma. So this is about Batman and the gambling grandma. With a will of iron and a heart of gold, Jessie Beck forged her own fate and became the heroine of stories told far beyond the Silver State. When she took young Dick Perry under her wing like a son, few could guess how legendary this pair would become. Dick went on to earn wings of gold, and Jessie put out the call to bring the squadron into the fold and then wined and dined us all. Reno's gambling grandma entered Navy lore when there for all to see On a Skyhawk from VA 164, we painted Lady Jessie. But the pilots of Air Wing 16 were called to Vietnam to battle air defenses like none had seen from Than Hoa to Bac Lang. Dick flew many a daring strike till that day over Haiphong, when he led us into the fight and things went terribly wrong. As enemy radars locked on and flak was everywhere, we heard the dreaded fan song guiding a missile into the air. It struck Batman from the sky and a good man was gone, but not before we heard the cry, "Press on, press on." On the flight deck, officers and men bowed their heads in prayer. Shots rang out, a flag dipped in the wind, and taps filled the air. 20 years on, in July '87, Jessie was welcomed above, into the halls of military heaven, among those that she loved. And along with thousands, Dick's name was inscribed on a somber granite wall. But here on Lady Jessie's gleaming side, just two names inspire us all.